I am Lady Rain, and this is the Reader's Nook. That's going to be my intro. I like that intro. So, we left off, and Harold is just put up a big banner on the roof that they could see from Route 1, and it's on a barn. And my eyelashes twisted. Sure what. Okay. It said, have gone to Stovington, and this is all caps. Stovington, Vermont, Plague Center, US 1 to Wells, Interstate 95 to Portland, US 302 to Barr, Interstate 89 to Stovington, leaving Ogunquit July 2nd, 1990. Harold Emery Lauder, Francis Goldsmith. And here we go. I didn't know your middle name, Harold said apologetically. That's fine, Franny said, still looking up at the sign. The first line had been written just below the cupola window. The last, her name, just above the rain gutter. How did you get that last line on? She asked. It wasn't hard, he said self-consciously. I had to dangle my feet over a little, that's all. Oh, Harold, why couldn't you just sign for yourself? Because we're a team, he said. And then looked at her a little apprehensively. Aren't we? Well, I guess we are, as long as you don't kill yourself. Hungry? He beamed, hungry as a bear. Then let's go eat. And I'll put some baby oil on your sunburn. You're just going to have to wear your shirt, Harold. You won't be able to sleep on that tonight. I'll sleep fine, he said, and smiled at her. Franny smiled back. They ate a supper of canned food and Kool-Aid. Franny made it and added sugar. And later, when it had begun to get dark, Harold came over to Fran's house with something under his arm. It was Amy's, he said. I found it in the attic. I think Mom and Dad gave it to her when she graduated from junior high. I don't even know if it works, but I got some batteries from the hardware store. He patted his pockets, which were bulging with ever-ready batteries. It was a portable phonograph, the kind with the plastic cover, invented for teenage girls of 13 or 14 to take to the beach and lawn parties. Turn that off. I'm going to put this under so it stays a little bit more even. And lawn parties. The kind of phonograph constructed with 45 singles in mind. Those are small LPs, small records, because there's the big ones and then small ones. You believe. The ones made by the Osmonds, Leif Garrett, John Travolta, John Cassidy. She looked at it closely and felt her eyes filling with tears. Well, she said, let's see if it does. It did work. And for almost 4 hours they sat at the opposite ends of the couch, the portable phonograph on the coffee table before them, their faces lit with silent and sorrowful fascination, listening as the music of the dead world filled the summer night. Chapter 37. At first Stu accepted the sound without question. It was such a typical part of the bright summer morning. He had just passed through the town of South Ryagate, New Hampshire, and now the highway wound around a pretty country of overhanging elms that dappled on the road with coins of moving sunshine. The underbrush on either side was thick. Bright sumac, blue jay juniper, lots of bushes he couldn't name. The profusion of them was still a wonder to his eyes, accustomed as they were to East Texas, where the roadside flora had nothing like this variety. On the left, an ancient rock wall meandered in and out of the brush, and on the right, a small brook gurgled cheerily east. Every now and then, small animals would move in the underbrush. Yesterday he had been transfixed by the sight of a large doe standing on the white line of 302, scenting the morning air, and birds called graciously. And against that background of sound, the barking dog sounded like the most natural thing in the world. He walked almost another mile before it occurred to him that the dog, closer now by the sound, might be out of the ordinary after all. He had seen a great many dead dogs since leaving Stovington. It's funny, Franny and Harold are headed to Stovington, and Stu is headed out of Stovington. Maybe they'll meet up. But no live ones. Well, he supposed the flu had killed most, but not all of the people. Apparently, it had killed most, but not all of the dogs as well. Probably it would be extremely people shy by now. When it scented him, it would most likely crawl back into the bushes and bark hysterically at him until Stu left its territory. He adjusted the straps of the day glow pack he was wearing and refolded the handkerchiefs that lay under the straps of each shoulder. He was wearing a pair of Georgia Giants, and 3 days of walking had rubbed most of the new from them. On his hand was a jaunty, wide-brimmed red felt hat. On his head, felt hat, and there was an army carbine slung across his shoulder. He did not expect to run across marauders, but he had a vague idea that it might be a good idea to have a gun. Fresh meat, maybe. Well, he had seen fresh meat yesterday, still on the hoof, but he had been too amazed and pleased to even think of shooting it. The pack riding easy again, he went on up the road. The dog sounded as if it was just beyond the next bend. Maybe I'll see him after all, Stu thought. He had picked up 302 going east. Perhaps I'm waiting to see if they meet. Because he supposed that sooner or later it would take him to the ocean. He had made a kind of compact with himself. When I get to the ocean, I'll decide what I'm going to do. Until then, I won't think about it at all. His walk, now in its 4th day, had been a kind of healing process. He had thought about taking his 10-speed bike or maybe a motorcycle, with which one could thread this way through the occasional crashes that blocked the road, but instead he had decided to walk. He had always enjoyed hiking, and his body cried out for exercise. Until his escape from Sovington, he had been cooped up for nearly 2 weeks, and he felt flabby and out of shape. He supposed that sooner or later his slow progress would make him impatient, and he would get the bike or motorcycle, but for now he was content to hike east on this road, looking at whatever he wanted to look at, taking 5 when he wanted to, or in the afternoon dropping off for a snooze during the hottest part of the day. It was good for him to be doing this. Little by little, the lunatic's search for a way out was fading into memory. Just something that had happened instead of a thing so vivid it brought cold sweat out onto his skin. The memory of that feeling of someone following him had been the hardest to shake. The first 2 nights on the road, he had dreamed again and again of his final encounter with Elder, when Elder had come to carry out his orders. In the dreams, Stu was always too slow with the chair. Elder stepped back out of its arc, pulling the trigger of the pistol, and Stu felt a heavy but painless boxing glove weighted with lead shot land on his chest. He dreamed this over and over until he woke unrested in the morning, but so glad to be alive that he hardly realized it. Last night that dream hadn't come. He doubted if the willies would stop all at once, but he thought he might be walking the poison out of his system little by little. Maybe he would never get rid of all of it, but when most of it was gone, he felt sure he would be able to think better about what came next, whether he had reached the ocean by then or not. He came around the bend, and there was the dog, an auburn-colored Irish setter. It barked joyously at the sight of Stu and ran up the road, toenails clicking on the composition surface, tail wagging frantically back and forth. It jumped up, placing its forepaws on Stu's belly, and its forward motion made him stagger back a bit. "Whoa, boy," he said, grinning. The dog barked happily at the sound of his voice and leaped up again. "Kojak," a stern voice said, and Stu jumped and stared around. Get down. Leave that man alone. You're going to track all over his shirt, miserable dog. Kojak put all 4 feet on the road again and walked around Stu with his tail between his legs. The tail was still flapping back and forth in suppressed joy despite its confinement, however, and Stu decided this one would never make much of a canine put-on artist. Now he could see the owner of the voice, and of Kujak, it seemed like, a man of about 60 wearing a ragged sweater, old gray pants, and a beret. He was sitting on a piano stool and holding a palette. An easel with a canvas on it stood before him. Now he stood up. I apologize. This eyelash that's twisted is going to bug me. Now he stood up, placed the palette on the piano stool. Under his breath, Stu heard him mutter, "Now don't forget and sit on that," and walked toward Stu with his hand extended. Beneath the beret, his fluffy grayish hair bounced in a small and mellow breeze. "I hope you intend no foul play with that rifle, sir. Glenn Bateman, at your service." Stu stepped forward and took the outstretched hand. Kojak was growing frisky again, bouncing around Stu, but not daring to renew his leaps. Not yet, at least. "Stu Redmond, don't worry about the gun. I ain't seen enough people to start shooting 'em. In fact, I ain't seen any until you." "Do you like caviar?" "Never tried it." "Then it's time you did. If you don't care for it, there's plenty of other things. Kojak, don't jump. I know you're thinking of renewing your crazed leaps. I can read you like a book. Control yourself. Always remember, Kojak, that control is what separates the higher orders from the lower. Control." His better nature thus appealed to Kojak, blah, blah, blah. His better nature thus appealed to, Kojak shrank down on his hunches and began to pant. He had a big grin on his doggy face. It had been Stu's experience with a grinning dog is either a biting dog or a damn good dog, and this didn't look like a biting dog. "I'm inviting you to lunch," Bateman said. "You're the first human being I've seen, at least in the last week. Will you stay?" "I'm glad to." "Southerner, are you?" "Southerner, aren't you? East Texas." "An Easterner, my mistake." Bateman cackled at his own wit and turned back to his picture, an indifferent watercolor of the woods across the road. "I wouldn't sit down on the piano stool if I were you," Stu said. "Shit, no, wouldn't do at all, would it?" He changed course and headed toward the back of the small clearing. Stu saw there was an orange and white cooler chest in the shade back there, with what looked like a white lawn tablecloth folded on top of it. When Bateman fluffed it out, Stu saw that was just what it was. "Used to be part of the communion set at the Grace Baptist Church in Woodsville," Bateman said. "I liberated it. I don't think the Baptists will miss it. They've all gone home to Jesus. At least, all the Woodsville Baptists have. They can celebrate their communion in person now. Although, I think the Baptists are going to find heaven a great letdown unless the management allows them television. Or perhaps they call it Heaven Vision up there, on which they can watch Jerry Falwell or Jack Van Imp. What we have here is an old pagan communing with nature instead." Kojak didn't step on the tablecloth. "Control, don't step on the tablecloth. Control, always remember that, Kojak. And all you do, make control your watchword. Shall we step across the road and have a wash, Mr. Redmond?" "Make it Stu." "All right, I will." They went down the road and washed in the cold, clear water. Stu felt happy. Meeting this particular man at this particular time seemed somehow exactly right. Downstream from them, Kojak lapped at the water, and then bounded off into the woods, barking happily. He flushed a wood pheasant, and Stu watched it explode from the brush, and thought with some surprise that just maybe everything would be all right. Somehow all right. He didn't care much for the caviar. It tasted like old fish jelly. but Bateman also had a pepperoni, a salami, 2 tins of sardines, some slightly mushy apples, and a large box of Keebler fig bars. Oh, those are good. I'm cold, so I'm trying to adjust myself. Don't ask me why I explain everything, I just do. I have allergies, so I keep itching my nose. I just figure, itch my nose. And I might sneeze, and I might yawn. I'll hiccup, and I'll cough, and I'll mess up my words. But it's nice to sit here and feel like I'm in a reading club with everybody. Just, we may not talk much, but it's really nice. Thank you for being here. Wonderful for the bowels, fig bars, Bateman said. Stu's bowels had been giving him no grief at all since he'd gotten out of Stovington and started walking, but he liked fig bars anyway and helped himself to half a dozen. In fact, he ate hungrily of everything. During the meal, which was eaten largely on saltines, Bateman told Stu he had been an assistant professor of sociology at Woodsville Community College. Woodsville, he said, was a small town, famous for its community college and its 4 gas stations, he told Stu. Another 6 miles down the road. His wife had been dead 10 years. They had been childless. Most of his colleagues had not cared for him, he said, and the feeling had been heartily mutual. They thought I was a lunatic, he said. The strong possibility that they were right did nothing to improve our relations. He had accepted the superflu epidemic with equanimity, he said, because at last he would be able to retire and paint full-time, as he had always wanted to do. As he divided the dessert, a Sara Lee pound cake, and handed Stu his half on a paper plate, he said, I'm a horrible painter. Horrible. But I simply tell myself that this July there was no one on earth painting better landscapes than Glendon, Pequod, Bateman, BAMFA, a cheap ego trip, but mine own. Was Kojak your dog before? No. That would have been a rather amazing coincidence, wouldn't it? I believe Kojak belonged to someone across town. I saw him occasionally, but since I didn't know what his name was, I had taken the liberty of rechristening him. He doesn't seem to mind. Excuse me for a minute, Stu. Trotted across the road, and Stu heard him splashing in the water. He came back shortly. Pant legs rolled to his knees. He was carrying a dripping 6-pack of Narragansett beer in his hand. This was supposed to go with the meal. Stupid of me. It goes just as well after, Stu said, pulling a can off the template. Thanks. They pulled their ring tabs, and Bateman raised his hand. To us, Stu. May we have happy days, satisfied minds, and little to no low back pain. Amen to that. They clicked their cans together and drank. Stu thought that a swallow of beer had never tasted so good to him before, and probably never would again. Ooh. You're a man of few words, Bateman said. I hope you don't feel that I'm dancing on the grave of the world, so to speak. No, Stu said. I was prejudiced against the world, Bateman said. I admit that freely. The world in the last quarter of the 20th century had, for me at least, all the charm of an 80-year-old man dying of cancer of the colon. They say it's a malaise, which has struck all Western peoples as any century, draws to a close. We had always wrapped ourselves in mourning shrouds and gone around crying, Woe to thee, O Jerusalem, or Cleveland, as the case may be. The dancing sickness took place during the latter part of the 15th century. Bubonic plague, the Black Death, decimated Europe near the end of the 14th century. Whooping cough near the end of the 17th, and the first known outbreaks of influenza near the end of the 19th. We've become so used to the idea of the flu. It seems almost like the common cold to us, doesn't it? And no one but the historians seem to know that 100 years ago it didn't exist. It's during the last 3 decades of any given century that your religious maniacs arise with facts and figures showing that Armageddon is finally at hand. Such people are always there, of course, but near the end of the century their ranks seem to swell, and they are taken seriously by great numbers of people. Monsters appear: Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, Jack the Ripper, Lizzie Borden, Charles Manson, Richard Speck, and Ted Bundy. In our own time, if you like. It's been suggested by colleagues, even more fanciful than I, that Western man needs an occasional high colonic, a purging, and this occurs at the end of the centuries so that he can face the new century clean and full of optimism. And in this case, we've been given a super enema. It's super enema. When you think about it, that makes perfect sense. We are not, after all, simply approaching the centenary this time. We are approaching a whole new millennium. Bateman paused, considering. Now that I think about it, I am dancing on the grave of the world. Another beer? Stu took one and thought over what Bateman had said. It's not really the end, he said at last. At least, I don't think so. Just intermission? Rather apt. Well said. I'm going back to my picture if you don't mind. Go ahead. Have you seen any other dogs? Bateman asked, as Kojak came bounding joyously back across the road. No, nor have I. You're the only other person I've seen, but Kojak seems to be one of a kind. If he's alive, there will be others. Not very scientific, Bateman said kindly. What kind of American are you? Show me a second dog, preferably a bitch, and I'll accept your thesis that somewhere there is a third. But don't show me one, and from that posit a second, it won't do. I've seen cows, Stu said thoughtfully. Cows, yes, and deer, but the horses are all dead. You know, that's right, Stu agreed. He had seen several dead horses on his walk. In some cases, cows had been grazing upwind of the bloating bodies. Now, why should that be? No idea. We all respire in much the same way, and this seems to be primarily a respiratory disease. But I wonder if there isn't some other factor. Men, dogs, horses catch it. Cows and deer don't. Rats were down for a while, but now seem to be coming back. Bateman was recklessly mixing paint on his palette. Cats everywhere, a plague of cats, and from what I can see, the insects are going on pretty much as they always have. Of course, a little faux-pas mankind commits rather rarely seems to affect them anyway. And the thought of a mosquito with the flu is just too ridiculous to consider. They have West Nile virus and malaria, but not the flu. None of it makes any surface sense. It's crazy. It sure is, Stu said, and uncorked another beer. His head was buzzing pleasantly. We're apt to see some interesting shifts in the ecology, Bateman said. He was making a horrible mistake of trying to paint Kojak into the picture. Remains to be seen if Homo sapiens is going to be able to reproduce himself in the wake of this. It very much remains to be seen, but at least we can get together and try. But is Kojak going to find a mate? Is he ever going to become a proud papa? Jesus, I guess he might not. Bateman stood, put his palette on his piano stool, and got a fresh beer. I think you're right, he said. There probably are other people, other dogs, other horses, but many of the animals may die without ever reproducing. There may be some animals of those susceptible species who were pregnant when the flu came along, of course. There are many dozens of healthy women in the United States right now who, pardon the crudity, have cakes baking in the oven. But some of the animals are apt to just sink below the point of no return. If you take the dogs out of the equation, the deer, who seem immune, are going to run wild. Certainly, there aren't enough men left around to keep the deer population down. Hunting season is going to be canceled for a few years. Well, Stu said, the surplus deer will just starve. No, they won't. Not all of them. Not even most of them. Not up here, anyway. I can't speak for what might happen in East Texas, but in New England, All the gardens are planted and growing nicely before all the gardens were planted and growing nicely before this flu happened. The deer will have plenty to eat this year and next. Even after that, our crops will germinate wild. There won't be any starving deer for maybe as long as 7 years. If you come back this way in a few years, Stu, you won't have to elbow deer out of your way. You'll have to elbow deer out of your way to get up the road. Stu worked this over in his mind. Finally, he said, "Aren't you exaggerating?" "Not on purpose. There may be a factor or factors I haven't taken into consideration, but I honestly don't think so. And we could take my hypothesis about the effect of the complete or almost complete subtraction of the dog population on the deer population and apply it to the relationships between other species. Cats breeding without check. What does that mean? Well, I said rats were down on the ecological exchange, but making a comeback. If there are enough cats, that may change. A world without rats sounds good at first, but I wonder. What did you mean when you said whether or not people could reproduce themselves was open to question? There are two possibilities, Bateman said. At least two that I see now. The first is that the babies may not be immune. You mean die as soon as they get into the world? Yes, or possibly in utero. Less likely, but still possible. The superflu may have had some sterility effect on those of us that are left. That's crazy, Stu said. So's the mumps, Glenn Bateman said dryly. But if the mothers of the babies that are in utero, if the mothers are immune, yes, in some cases, immunities can pass from the mother to child, just as susceptibilities can, but not in all cases. You can't just bank on it. I think the future of babies now in utero is very uncertain. Their mothers are immune, granted, but statistical probability says the most of the fathers are not and are now dead. What's the other possibility? That we may finish the job of destroying our species ourselves, Bateman said calmly. I actually think that's very possible. Not right away, because we're all too scattered. But man is a gregarious social animal, and eventually we'll get back together, if only we can tell each other stories about how we survived the Great Plague of 1990. Most of the societies that form are apt to be primitive dictatorships run by Little Caesars, unless we're very lucky. A few may be enlightened, democratic communities, and I'll tell you exactly what the necessary requirement for that kind of society in the 1990s and early 2000s is going to be. A community with enough technical people in it to get the lights back on. It could be done, and very easily. This isn't the aftermath of a nuclear war, with everything laid to waste. All the machinery is just sitting there, waiting for someone to come along, the right someone, who knows how to clean the plugs and replace a few burned out bearings and start it up again. It's all a question of how many of those who have been spared understand the technology we all take for granted. Stu sipped his beer. Think so? Sure. Bateman took a swallow of his own beer, then leaned forward and smiled grimly at Stu. Now, let me give you a hypothetical situation, Mr. Stuart Redmond from East Texas. Suppose we have Community A in Boston and Community B in Utica. They are aware of each other, and each community is aware of the conditions in the other community's camp. Society A is in good shape. They are living on Boston Hill in the lap of luxury because one of their members just happens to be the co-ed repairman. A co-ed repairman. Oh my gosh, a con-ed repairman. The guy knows just enough to get the power plant, which serves Beacon Hill, running again. It would mostly be a matter of knowing which switches to pull when the plant went into an automatic shutdown. Once it's running, it's almost all automated anyhow. The repairman can teach other members of Society A which levers to pull and which gadgets to watch. The turbines run on oil, of which there is a glut, because everybody who used to use it Garbage. That used to use it is as dead as old dad's hat band. So in Boston, the juice is flowing. There's heat against the cold, light so that you can read at night, refrigeration so you can have your scotch on the rocks like a civilized man. In fact, life is pretty damn near idyllic. No pollution, no drug problem, no race problem, no shortages, no money or barter problem, because all the goods, if not the services, are out on display, and there are enough of them to last a radically reduced society for 3 centuries. Sociologically speaking, such a group would probably become communal in nature. No dictatorship here. The proper breeding ground for dictatorship, conditions of want, need, uncertainty, privation, they simply wouldn't exist. Boston would probably end up being run by a town meeting form of government again. And here's another thing. If food has to be canned and bagged and farmed and produced, who's going to run the canneries? Who's going to run those factories? Think about this. Once that food is gone, it's gone. But Community B, up here in Utica, there's no one to run the power plant. The technicians are all dead. It's going to take a long time for them to figure out how to make things go again. In the meantime, they're cold at night and winter is coming. They're eating out of cans. They're miserable. A strong man takes over. They're glad to have him because they're confused and cold and sick. Let him make the decisions, and of course he does. He sends someone to Boston with a request. Well, they send their pet technician up to Utica to help them get their power plant going again. The alternative is a long and dangerous move south for the winter. So, what does Community A do when they get this message? They send the guy? Stu asked. Bryce testicles? No! He might be held against his will. In fact, it would be extremely unlikely. It would be extremely likely. In the post-flu world, technological knowledge or know-how. Jumped the gun there. Know-how is going to replace gold as the most perfect medium of exchange. And in those terms, Society A is rich and Society B is poor. So what does Society B do? I guess they go south, Stu said, then grinned. Maybe even to East Texas. Maybe, or maybe they threaten the Boston people with a nuclear warhead. Right, Stu said. They can't get their power plant going, but they can fire a nuclear missile at Beantown, Bateman said. If it was me, I wouldn't bother with the missile. I'd just try to figure out how to detach the warhead, then drive it to Boston in a station wagon. Think that would work? Dogged if I know. Even if it didn't, there are plenty of conventional weapons around. That's the point. All of that stuff is lying around, waiting to be packed up. And if communities A and B both have pet technicians, they might work up some kind of rusty nuclear exchange over religion or territoriality, or some paltry ideological difference. Just think, instead of 6 or 7 world nuclear powers, we may end up with 60 or 70 of them right here in the continental United States. If the situation were different, I'm sure that there would be fighting with rocks and spiked clubs. But the fact is, all the old soldiers have faded away and left their playthings behind. It's a grim thing to be thinking about, especially after so many grim things have already happened. And I'm afraid it's entirely possible. A silence fell between them. Far off, they could hear Kojak barking in the woods as the day turned on its noontime axis. You know, Bateman said finally, I'm fundamentally a cheerful man. Maybe because I have a low threshold of satisfaction. It's made me greatly disliked in my field. I have my faults. I talk too much, as you've heard, and I'm a terrible painter, as you've seen. And I used to be terribly unwise with money. I sometimes spent the last 3 days before payday eating peanut butter sandwiches, and I was notorious in Woodsville for opening savings accounts and then closing them out a week later. But I never really let it get me down, Stu. Eccentric but cheerful, that's me. The only bane of my life has been my dreams. Ever since boyhood, I've been plagued by amazingly vivid dreams. A lot of them have been nasty. As a youngster, it was trolls under bridges that reached up and grabbed my foot, or a witch that turned me into a bird. I would open my mouth to scream, and nothing but a string of caws would come out. Do you ever have bad dreams, Stu? Sometimes, Stu said, thinking of Elder and how Elder lurched after him in his nightmares, and of the corridors that never ended but only switched back on themselves, lit by cold fluorescence and filled with echoes. Then you know. When I was a teenager, I had the regular quota of sexy dreams, both wet and dry, but those were sometimes interspersed with dreams in which the girl I was with would change into a toad or a snake or even a decaying corpse. As I grew older, I had dreams of failure, dreams of degradation, dreams of suicide, dreams of horrible accidental death. The most recurrent was one where I was slowly being crushed to death under a gas station lift. All simple permutations of the troll dream, I suppose. I really believe that such dreams are simply psychological emetic, and the people who have them are more blessed than cursed. If you get rid of it, it doesn't pile up. Exactly. There are all sorts of dream interpretations, Freud's being the most notorious, but I have always believed they served a simple, elementary, eliminatory factor, and not much more. That dreams are the psyche's way of taking a good dump every now and then, and the people who don't dream, or don't dream in the way they can often remember when they wake up, are mentally constipated in some way. After all, the only practical compensation for having a nightmare of having a nightmare is waking up and realizing it was just a dream. Hey, no, if you're gonna bark, you're gonna stop. When Dad gets up. For now, I'm gonna read, and then we are going to work on the dining room. What you all have for breakfast? I haven't had breakfast yet because I haven't eaten. I don't think there's donuts left. You make eggs if you want. And realizing it was all just a dream, Stu smiled. You hush. You be hushed. Just watch. She did so good this morning. Oh my gosh. She bought what? Sure. American cheese on top? Why not? 2 eggs with a piece of American cheese. Sounds good. She did really good. We have people that come to our house for our youngest son. And this morning she was barking and she put her hand out to Phoebe and she'd just bark at her. She never bit anybody, but she barks. She'll get right up in your face and bark if you let her jump on you. And she's barking and she's barking. And then she stopped. She's barking, she's barking. She'll growl and she'll bark and she'll jump. And it's all about, it's a hyperreactive. And I think it's all about, you're in my territory. Why aren't you reacting the way I want you to? And she keeps going. And then finally I got her muzzle on her and she calmed down. And by the end, she wasn't making a sound. All within an hour. I was really proud of her. How do you like your eggs? However you want to make them. Scrambled or fried. And realizing it was just a dream. I know I said that 3 times, sorry. Just trying to keep where I'm at. Stu smiled, but lately I had an extremely bad dream. It occurs, like my dream of being crushed to death under the lift, but it makes that one look like a pussycat in comparison. It's like no other dream I've ever had. Somehow, it's like all of them, as if it were the sum of all bad dreams, and I wake up feeling bad, as if it wasn't a dream at all, but a vision. I know how crazy that must sound. What is it? It's a man, Bateman said quietly. At least, I think it's a man. He's standing on the roof of a high building, or maybe it's a cliff that he's on. Whatever it is, he's so high that it shears away into mist thousands of feet below. I'm petting her chest, trying to keep her calm. It's near sunset, but he's looking the other way, east. Sometimes he seems to be wearing blue jeans and a denim jacket, and more often he's in a robe with a cowl. I can never see his face, but I can see his eyes, his red eyes. And I have a feeling that he's looking for me, and that sooner or later he will find me, or I will be forced to go to him, and that will be the death of me. So I try to scream, and he trailed off with an embarrassing little shrug. That's when you wake up? Yes. They watched Kojak come trotting back, and Bateman patted him while Kojak nosed in the aluminum dish and cleaned up the last of the pound cake. Well, it's just a dream, I suppose, Bateman said. He stood up, wincing as his knees popped. If I were being psychoanalyzed, I suppose the shrink would say the dream expresses my unconscious fear of some leader or leaders who will start the whole thing going again. Maybe a fear of technology in general, because I do believe that all the new societies which arise, at least in the Western world, will have technology as their cornerstone. It's a pity, and it needn't be, but it will be, because we are hooked. They won't remember, or choose to remember, the corner we had painted ourselves into. The dirty rivers, the hole in the ozone layer, the atomic bomb, the atmospheric pollution. All they'll remember is that once upon a time, they could keep warm at night without expanding much effort to do it. I'm eluded, on top of my other failings, you see. This dream, it preys on me, Stu. Stu said nothing. Well, I want to get back, Bateman said briskly. I'm halfway drunk already, and I believe there will be thunder showers this afternoon. He walked to the back of the clearing and rummaged there. A few moments later, he came back with a wheelbarrow. He screwed the piano stool down to its lowest elevation and put it in, added his palette, the picnic cooler, and balanced precariously on top of everything else, his macabre painting. You wheeled that all the way out here? Stu asked. I wheeled it until I saw something I wanted to paint. I go different ways on different days. It's good exercise. If you're going east, why don't you come back to Woodsville and spend the night at my house? We can take turns wheeling the burro, and I've got yet another 6-pack of beer cooling in yonder stream. That ought to get us home in style. I accept, Stu said. Good man. I'll probably talk all the way home. You're in the arms of garrulous professor, East Texas. When I bore you, you just tell me to shut up. I won't be offended. I like to listen, Stu said. Then you are one of God's chosen. Let's go. So they walked on down 302, one of them wheeling the barrow while the other drank a beer. And no matter which was which, Bateman talked, an endless monologue that jumped from topic to topic with hardly a pause. Kojak bounced alongside. Stu would listen for a while, then his thoughts would trail off for a while, following their own tangents, and then his mind would come back. He was disquieted by Bateman's picture of 100 little enclaves of people, some of them militaristic, military, living in a country where thousands of doomsday weapons had been left around like a child's set of blocks. But oddly, the thing his mind kept returning to was Glenn Bateman's dream, the man with no face on top of the high building or the cliff edge, the man with the red eyes, his back to the setting sun, looking restlessly to the east.
I have no idea at all if you'll like this.
What did you do?
You wanted the cheese cooked with the egg, right?
Did you put the cheese inside the egg?
No, yeah, it's kind of inside the egg because of how I'm flipping it, in a sense. Right. There are 2 eggs there, and I cooked the cheese with it.
Well, thank you.
Not sure if there's yellow yolk inside or not. Cooking so the yolk is hard, so it works good in sandwiches.
Yeah, it does. You're not getting my egg. You have your food. I'm gonna try it. It's actually really good. Let's see. Might get to 40. He woke up sometime before midnight, bathed in sweat, afraid he had screamed. But in the next room, Glenn Bateman's breathing was slow and regular, undisturbed. And in the hallway, he could see Kojak sleeping with his head on his paws. Everything was picked out in moonlight, so bright it was surreal. When he woke, Stu had been up on his elbows, and now he lowered himself back to the damp sheet and put an arm over his eyes, not wanting to remember the dream, but helpless to avoid it. He had been in Stovington again. Elder was dead. Everyone was dead. The place was an echoing tomb. He was the only one alive. He couldn't find a way out. At first he tried to control his panic. Walk, don't run, he told himself over and over. But soon he would have to run. His stride was becoming quicker and quicker, and the urge to look back over his shoulder and make sure that it was only the echoes behind him was becoming insuperable. He walked past closed office doors with names written in black on milky frosted glass, past an overturned gurney, past the bodies of a nurse with her white skirt rucked up to her thighs, her blackened, grimacing face staring at the cold, white, inverted ice cube trays that were the ceiling fluorescents. At last, he began to run. Faster, faster. The door slipped by him and gone, his feet pounding on the linoleum, orange arrows oozing on white cinder block. Signs. At first they seemed right. Radiology, corridor B to labs. Do not proceed beyond this point without valid pass. And then he was in another part of the installation, a part he had never seen, and was never meant to see, and had never been meant to see. The paint on these walls had begun to peel and flake. Some of the fluorescents were out. Others buzzed like flies caught in a screen. Some of the frosted glass office windows were shattered, and through the stellated holes he had been able to see wreckage and bodies in terrible positions of pain. There was blood. These people had not died of the flu. These people had been murdered. Their bodies had sustained punctures and gunshot wounds and grisly traumas, which could only have been inflicted by blunt instruments. Their eyes bulged and stared. He plunged down a stopped escalator and into a long dark tunnel lined with tile. At the other end, there were more offices, but now the doors were painted dead black. The arrows were bright red. The fluorescents buzzed and flickered. The signs read, "This way to cobalt urns, laser armory, and Sidewinder missiles and plague rooms." Then, sobbing with relief, he saw an arrow pointing around a right angled turn and a single blessed word above it, exit. He went around the corner and the door was standing open. Beyond it was a sweet, fragrant night. He plunged toward the door and then, stepping into it, blocking his way, was a man in jeans and denim jacket. Stu skipped to a stop, and a scream locked in his throat like rusty iron. And as the man stopped with the glow of the flickering fluorescence, Stu saw that there was only a cold black shadow where his face should have been. A blackness punched by two soulless red eyes. No soul, but a sense of humor. There was that, kind of dancing lunatic glee. The dark man put out his hands, and Stu saw that they were dripping blood. "Heaven and earth," the dark man whispered from that empty hole where his face should have been. All of heaven and earth. Stu had awakened. Now Kojak moaned and growled softly in the hall. His paws twitched in his sleep, and Stu supposed that even dogs dreamed. It was a perfectly natural thing, dreaming, even an occasional nightmare. But it was a long time before he could get back to sleep. I'm actually going to eat this real quick because I don't want it to get cold. It was very nice of him to feed me. So we're going on to 38. And I'm going to read until just after 1, I think. Yeah, I think so. She's staring. She's staring. She's like, Mama, feed me. She has her food. Excuse me, got caught in my throat. Mm-hmm. You made yourself breakfast, right?
Okay.
No, I didn't. You were on the other side of the wall.
Streaming?
Yeah.
Pause the stream for a second.
Stop.
Pause the stream. Talk to you about it.
Give me a second, guys. So yeah, we just have to wait and see. Oh, I need you to sign some papers today too. All right.
None of them are selling my soul, are they?
No.
Okay.
Not yet. Not yet.
Don't know where Jim is these days. He might be dead.
No, he's up in my closet. I hide him. Chapter 38. As the superflu epidemic wound down, there was a second epidemic that lasted roughly 2 weeks. The epidemic was the most common in technological societies such as the United States, least common in underdeveloped countries such as Peru or Senegal. In the United States, the second epidemic took about 16% of the superflu survivors. In places like Peru or Senegal, no more than 3%. The second epidemic had no name because the symptoms differed
I burned an egg.
Wildly from case to case.
I burned an egg.
Okay. One sec. Horrific. All right. When I get done reading, we'll take care of things.
You want any eggs? No.
In there. The second epidemic had no name because the symptoms differed wildly from case to case. A sociologist like Glenn Bateman might have called the second epidemic natural death or those old emergency room blues. It was strictly Darwinian. In a strictly Darwinian sense, it was the final cut, the unkindest cut of all, some might have said. Sam Tauber was 5.5 years old. His mother had died on June the 24th in the Murfreesboro, Georgia General Hospital. On the 25th, his father and younger sister, 2-year-old April, had died. On June the 27th, his older brother Mike died, leaving Sam to shift for himself. Sam had been in shock ever since the death of his mother. He wandered carelessly up and down the streets of Murfreesboro, eating when he was hungry, sometimes crying. After a while, he stopped crying, because crying did no good. It didn't bring the people back. At night, his sleep was broken by horrible nightmares, in which Papa and April and Mike died over and over, their faces swollen black, a terrible rattling sound in their chests as they strangled on their own snot. At 10:15 in the morning, July 2nd, Sam wandered into a field of wild blackberries behind Hattie Reynolds' house. Bemused and vacant-eyed, he zigzagged among the blackberry bushes that were almost twice as tall as he was, picking the berries and eating them until his lips and chin were smeared black. The thorns ripped at his clothes and sometimes at his bare flesh, but he barely noticed. Bees hummed drowsily around him. He never saw the older, rotted, well-covered, half-buried in the tall grass and blackberry. He never saw the old and rotted, well-cover, half buried in the tall grass and blackberry creepers. It gave under his weight with a grinding, splintering crash, and Sam plunged 20 feet down the rock-lined shaft to the dry bottom, where he broke both legs. He died 20 hours later, as much from fear and misery as from shock and hunger and dehydration. Irma Fayette lived in Lottie, California. She was a lady of 26, a virgin, morbidly afraid of rape. Her life had been one long nightmare since June 23rd, when looting had broken out in town and there had been no police to stop the looters. Irma had a small house on a side street. Her mother had lived there with her until she died of a stroke in 1985. When the looting began and the gunshots and the horrifying sound of drunken men roaring up and down the streets of the business section on motorcycles, Irma had locked all the doors and then had hidden in the spare room downstairs. Since then, she had crept upstairs periodically, quiet as a mouse, to get food and to relieve herself. Irma didn't like people. If everyone on earth had died but her, she would have been perfectly happy. But that wasn't the case. Only yesterday, after she had begun cautiously to hope that no one was left in Lottie but her, she had seen a gross and drunken man, a hippie man in a t-shirt that said, "I give up sex and drinking and it was the scariest 30 minutes of my life," wandering up the street with a bottle of whiskey in his hand. He had long blonde hair, which cascaded out from under the gibby cap he was wearing, and all the way down to his shoulders. Tucked into the waistband of his tight blue jeans was a pistol. Irma had peeked around the bedroom curtain at him until he was out of sight. Then had scurried downstairs to the barricaded spare room, as if she had been released from a malign spell. They were not all dead. If there was one hippie man left, there would be another hippie man. And they would all be rapers. They would rape her. Sooner or later, they would find her and rape her. This morning, before first light, she crept up to the attic, where her father's few possessions were stored in cardboard boxes. Her father had been a merchant seaman. He had deserted Irma's mother in the late 60s. Irma's mother had told Irma all about it. She had been perfectly frank. Father had been a beast who got drunk and then wanted to rape her. They all did. When they got married, they gave a man the right. That gave the man the right to rape you anytime he wanted, even in the daytime. Irma's mother always summed up her husband's desertion in 3 words, the same words Irma could have applied to the death of almost every man, woman, and child on the face of the earth. No great loss. Most of the boxes contained nothing but cheap trinkets bought in foreign ports. Souvenir of Hong Kong, souvenir of Saigon, souvenir of Copenhagen. There was a scrapbook of photos. Most of them show her father on ship, sometimes smiling into the camera with his arms about the shoulders of his fellow beasts. Well, probably the disease that they were calling Captain Trips out there had struck him down in whatever place he had run off to. No great loss. There was one wooden box with small gold hinges on it, and in this box was a gun, a .45 caliber pistol. It lay on red velvet, and in the secret compartment below the red velvet were some bullets. They were green and mossy looking, but Irma thought they would work all right. Bullets were metal. They didn't spoil like milk or cheese. She loaded the gun under the single cobwebby attic bulb and then went down to eat her breakfast at her own kitchen table. She would not hide like a mouse in a hole any longer. She was armed. Let the rapers beware. That afternoon she went out on the front porch to read her book. The name of the book was Satan is Alive and Well on the Planet Earth. It was grim and joyful stuff. The sinners and ingrates had gotten their just desserts, just as the book said they would. They were all gone, except for a few hippie rapers. And she guessed she could handle them. The gun was by her side. At 2:00, the man with the blonde hair came back. He was so drunk he could hardly stand up. He saw Irma and his face lighted, no doubt thinking of how lucky he had been to finally discover some pussy. "Hey, baby," he cried. "It's just you and me. How long?" Then terror clouded his face as he saw Irma put down her book and raise the .45. "Hey, listen, put that thing down. Is it loaded? Hey!" Irma pulled the trigger. The pistol exploded, killing her instantly. No great loss. George McDougall lived in Nyack, New York. He had been a teacher of high school mathematics, specializing in remedial work. He and his wife had been practicing Catholics, and Harriet McDougall had borne him 11 children, 9 boys and 2 girls. So between June 22nd, when his 9-year-old son Jeff had succumbed to what was then diagnosed as flu-related pneumonia, and June 29th, when his 16-year-old daughter Patricia, and oh God, she had been so young and so achingly beautiful, had succumbed to what everyone, those that were left, was then calling tube neck. What is that? Oh, you found a bone. He had seen the 12 people he loved best in the world pass away, while he himself remained healthy and feeling fine. He had joked at school about not being able to remember all his kids' names, but the order of their passing was engraved in his memory. Jeff on the 22nd, Marty and Helen on the 23rd, his wife Harriet and Bill and George Jr. and Robert and Stan on the 24th, Richard on the 25th, Danny on the 27th, 3-year-old Frank on the 28th, and finally Pat. Pat had seemed to be getting better, right up to the end. George thought he would go mad. What?
Plane forced to return to airport after horse escapes on board.
How was a horse even on? Wow. He had begun jogging 10 years before, at his doctor's advice. He didn't play tennis or hardball or handball. Paid a kid, one of his, of course, to mow the lawn, and usually drove to the corner store when Harriet needed a loaf of bread. You're putting on weight, Dr. Warner had said. Lead in the seat. No good for your heart. Try jogging. So he had gotten a sweatsuit and had begun jogging every night, and had gone jogging every night, for short distances at the start, and then longer and longer ones. At first, he'd felt self-conscious, sure that the neighbors might be tapping their foreheads and rolling their eyes. And then a couple of men that he had only known to wave to when they were out watering their lawns came and asked if they could join him. Probably there was safety in numbers, but by that time, George's two oldest boys had also joined in. It became a sort of neighborhood thing, and although the membership was always evolving as people dropped in and out, it stayed a neighborhood thing. Now that everyone was gone, he still jogged every day for hours. It was only when he was jogging, concentrating on nothing more than the thud of his tennis shoes on the sidewalk, and the swing of his arms, and his steady, harsh respiration, that he lost that feeling of impending madness. He could not commit suicide because, as a practicing Catholic, he knew that suicide was a mortal sin and God must be saving him for something, so he jogged. Yesterday he had jogged for almost 6 hours, until he was completely out of breath and almost retching with exhaustion. He was 51, not a young man anymore, and he supposed that so much running was not good for him, but in another, more important way, it was the only thing that was good, any good. So he'd gotten up this morning at first light after a mostly sleepless night. The thought that played over and over in his mind was Jeff, Marty, Helen, Harriet, Bill, George, Junior, Robert, Stanley. That sounds like a name, like one name. Richard, Danny, Frank, Patty. And I thought she was getting better. And put on his sweatsuit, he went out and began to jog up and down the deserted streets of Nyack. His feet sometimes gritting on broken glass, once leaping over a TV set that lay shattered on the pavement, taking him past residential streets where the shades were drawn, and also past the horrible 3-car crash on the main street intersection. He jogged first, but it became necessary to run faster and faster to keep the thoughts behind him. He jogged, and then he trotted, and then he ran, and finally he sprinted. A 51-year-old man with gray hair and a gray sweatsuit and white tennis shoes, fleeing up and down empty streets, as if all the devils of hell were after him. At 11:15, he suffered a massive coronary thrombosis and fell down dead on the corner of Oak and Pine, near a fire plug. The expression on his face was very like gratitude. Mrs. Eileen Drummond of Lewiston, Florida, got very drunk on DeKuyper. You know what? We're just going to call it DeKuyper. DeKuyper cream day menth on the afternoon of the July 2nd. She wanted to get drunk because she was drunk. If she was drunk, she wouldn't have to think about her family, and creme de menthe was the only kind of alcohol she could stand. She had found a baggie filled with marijuana in her 16-year-old's room the day before and had succeeded in getting stoned. But being stoned only seemed to make things worse. She had sat in her living room all afternoon, stoned and crying over photographs in her scrapbook. So this afternoon she drank a whole bottle of creme de menthe, and then got sick and threw up in the bathroom, and then went to bed and lit a cigarette and fell asleep. Burned the house down. She didn't have to think about it anymore, ever. The wind had freshened, and she also burnt down most of Lewiston. No great loss. Arthur Stimson lived in Reno, Nevada. On the afternoon of the 29th, after swimming in Lake Tahoe, he stepped on a rusty nail. The wound turned gangrenous. He diagnosed the trouble by smell and tried to amputate his foot. Halfway through the operation, he fainted and died of shock and blood loss in the lobby of Toby Harris Gambling Casino, where he had attempted the operation. In Swanville, Maine, 10-year-old girl named Candace Moran fell off her bike and died of a fractured skull. Milton Croslow, a rancher in Hardin County, New Mexico, was bitten by a rattlesnake and died half an hour later. In Milltown, Kentucky, Judy Horton was quite pleased with events. Judy was 17 years old and pretty. 2 years before, she had made 2 serious mistakes. She had allowed herself to get pregnant, and she had allowed her parents to talk her into marrying the boy responsible. A 4 Eyes engineering student from the state university. At 15, she had been flattered just to be asked out by a college man, even if he was only a freshman. And for the life of her, she couldn't remember why she had allowed Waldo Horton, what a yuck name, to work his will on her. And if she was going to be knocked up, why did it have to be him? Judy had also allowed Steve Phillips and Mark Collins to work their will on her. They were both in the Milltown High football team. The Milton Cougars, to be exact. Fight, 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 fight for the dear blue and white. And she was a cheerleader. If it hadn't been for yucky old Waldo Horton, she would have made head cheerleader her junior year easy. And getting back to the point, either Steve or Mark would have made more acceptable husbands. They both had broad shoulders, and Mark had stone bitchin' shoulder-length blonde hair. But it was Waldo. It could have been no one but Waldo. All she had to do was look in her diary and do the arithmetic. And after the baby came, she wouldn't have even had to do that. It looked just like him. Yucky. For 2 long years, she had struggled along with a variety of crummy jobs in fast food restaurants and motels, while Waldo went to school. It got so she hated Waldo's school most of all, even more than the baby and Waldo himself. If he wanted a family so bad, why couldn't he go out and work? She had. But her parents and his wouldn't allow it. Alone, Judy could have sweet-talked him into it. She would have gotten him to promise before she let him touch her in bed. But all 4 of the in-laws had their noses in things all the time. Oh, Judy, things will be so much better when Waldo has a good job. Oh, Judy, things will look much brighter if you go to church more often. Oh, Judy, eat shit and keep smiling until you get it down. Until you get it all down. Then the superflu had come along and had solved all her problems. Her parents had died. Her little boy Petey had died. That was sort of sad. But she got over it in a couple of days. Then Waldo's parents had died. And finally Waldo himself had died. She was free. The thought that she herself might die had never crossed her mind. And of course she didn't. They had been living in a large and rambling apartment house in downtown Milltown. One of the features of the place that sold Waldo on it, Judy, of course, didn't have a say, was a large walk-in meat freezer in the basement. They had taken the apartment in September of '88, and their apartment was on the 3rd floor. Anne, who always seemed to get stuck taking the roast and the hamburger down to the freezer. 3 guesses and the first 2 don't count. Waldo and Petey had died at home. By that time, she couldn't get hospital service unless you were a big wig. You couldn't get it, and the mortuaries were swamped. Creepy old places anyway. Judy couldn't go near one on a bet. But the power was still on, so she had taken them downstairs and put them in the freezer. The power had gone off in Milltown 3 days ago. But it was still fairly cool down there. Judy knew because she went down to look at their dead bodies 3 or 4 times a day. She told herself she was just checking. What else could it be? Surely she wasn't gloating. She went down on the afternoon of July 2nd and forgot to put the rubber wedge under the freezer door. The door swung shut behind her and latched. It was then that she noticed, after 2 years of coming and going down here, that there was no inside knob on the freezer door. By then it was too warm to freeze, but not too cold to starve. So Judy Horton died in the company of her son and husband, after all. Jim Lee of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, hooked up all the electrical outlets in the house to the gasoline generator and then electrocuted himself trying to start it up. Richard Hoggins was a young black man who had lived his entire life in Detroit, Michigan. He had been addicted to the fine white powder he called heroin. Huron, I think. Huron. For the last 5 years. During the actual superflu epidemic, he had gone through extreme withdrawal as all the pushers and users he knew died and fled. On this bright sunny afternoon, he was sitting in the littered stoop, drinking a warm 7-Up and wishing he had a pop, just a small, minor skin pop. He began to think about Allie McFarland, something he had heard about Allie on the streets just before the shit hit the fan. People were saying that Allie, who was about the 3rd biggest in Detroit, had just gotten a fine shipment. Oh, everybody was going to get well. None of that brown shit, China white, all kinds of stuff. Richie didn't know for sure where McFarland would keep a big order like that. It wasn't healthy to know about such things, but he had heard it said at different times in passing that if the cops ever got a search writ for the Grasse Point house that Allie had bought for his great uncle, Allie could go away until the new moon turned to gold. Richie decided to take a walk to the Grasse Point. After all, there was nothing better to do. He got to the Lakeshore Drive address of one Ernie D. McFarland from the Detroit phone book and walked out there. It was almost dark by the time he made it, and his feet hurt. But he was no longer trying to tell himself that this was just a casual stroll. He wanted to shoot, and he wanted too bad. There was a gray fieldstone wall. "Put her out, please," around the estate, and Richie went over it outside like a black shadow. As long as they're outside, they don't seem to fight. Cutting his hands on the broken glass and bedded on the top. When he broke a window to gain entry, a burglar alarm went off, causing him to flee halfway down the lawn. Before he remembered, there were no cops to answer. He came back, jittery and slicked with sweat. The main power was off, but there was easily 20 rooms in the fucking place. He'd have to wait until tomorrow to look properly, and would still take 3 weeks to dump the place upside down in the proper way. And the stuff probably wasn't even here. Christ. Richie felt sick despair wave through him. But he would at least look in the obvious places. And in the upstairs bathroom, he found a dozen large plastic bags bulging with white powder. They were in the toilet tank. And that old standby. Richie stared at them, sick with desire, dimly thinking that Allie must have been greasing all the right people if he could afford. Oh, Allie's a guy. He could afford to leave a stash like this in a fucking toilet tank. There's enough dope here to last one man 16 centuries. He took one bag into the master bedroom, broke it open on the bedspread. His hands trembled as he got his works out and cooked up. It never occurred to him to wonder how much this stuff was cut. On the street, the heaviest hit Richie had ever taken was 12% pure, and that had put him into a sleep so deep it was nearly a coma. He hadn't even nodded. Just bang, and off he went, out of the blue and into the black. He injected himself above the elbow and pushed the plunger of his spike home. The stuff was almost 96% pure. It hit his bloodstream like a highballing freight, and Richie fell down on the bags of heroin, flowering the front of his shirt with it. He was dead 6 minutes later. No great loss. Let's see. I think, yeah, 40's here somewhere. Figure it out. But we're going to try to get through 39. Chapter 39. Ready? Lloyd Henry was down on his knees. He was humming and grinning. Every now and then he would forget what he had been humming and grinning, and would fade, and he would sob a little bit, and then he would forget he was crying and go on humming. The song he was humming was Camptown Races. Every now and then, instead of humming or sobbing, he would whisper doo-dah, doo-dah under his breath. The holding cell block was utterly quiet, except for the humming and sobbing and occasional doo-dah, and the soft scrape of the cot leg as Lloyd fumbled with it. He was trying to turn Trask's body around so he could get at the leg. Please, waiter, bring me some more of the coleslaw and another leg. Lloyd looked like a man who had embarked upon a radical crash diet. His prison coverall hung on his body like a slim sail. The last meal served in the holding cell block had been lunch 8 days ago. Lloyd's skin was stretched tightly across his face, limiting every curve and angle of the skull beneath. His eyes were bright and glittering. His lips had drawn back from his teeth. He had an oddly piebald look because his hair had begun to fall out in clumps. He looked crazy. Doo-dah, doo-dah, Lloyd whispered as he fished out his cot leg. Once upon a time, he hadn't known why he had bothered hurting his fingers to unscrew the damn thing. Once upon a time, he had thought he had known what real hunger was. That hunger had been nothing but a slight edge to the appetite when compared to this. Ride around all night, ride around all day. Doo-dah. The cot leg snagged the cuff of Trask's pants leg, and then pulled free. Lloyd put his head down and sobbed like a child. Behind him, tossed indifferently in one corner, was the skeleton of the rat he had killed in Trask's cell on June 29th, 5 days ago. The rat's long pink tail was still attached to the body. Lloyd had tried repeatedly to eat the tail, but it was too tough. Almost all the water in the toilet bowl was gone, despite his efforts to conserve it. The cell was filled with the reek of urine. He had been peeing out into the corridor so as not to contaminate his water supply. He had not, and this was understandable enough, considering the radically reduced conditions of his diet, had to move his bowels. He had eaten the food he had squirreled away too fast. He knew that now. He had thought someone would come. He hadn't been able to believe. He didn't want to eat Trask. The thought of eating Trask was horrible. Just last night he managed to slap one of his slippers over a cockroach and had eaten it alive. He had felt it scurrying madly around inside his mouth just before his teeth had crunched it in two. Actually, It hadn't been half bad, much tastier than the rat. No, he didn't want to eat Trask. He didn't want to be a cannibal. It was like the rat. He would get Trask over within reaching distance, but just in case. Just in case. He had heard a man could go a long time without food as long as he had water. Not much water, but I won't think about that now. Not just now. No, not just now. He didn't want to die. He didn't want to starve. He was too full of hate. The hate had built up to a fairly leisurely pace over the last 3 days, growing with his hunger. He supposed that, if his long-dead pet rabbit had been capable of thought, it would have hated him in the same way. He slept a great deal now, and his sleep was always troubled with dreams of his rabbit. Its body swollen, its fur matted, maggots squirming in its eyes. Worst of all, those bloody paws. As he awoke, he would look at his fingers and dread fascination. At his own fingers in dread fascination. Lloyd's hate had coalesced around the simple, imagistic concept. This concept was the key. He was locked in. Once upon a time, it had seemed right that he would be. He was one of the bad guys. Well, not really a bad guy. And this is Lloyd beside Trask, pulling him into his cell. Okay. Poke had been the really bad guy. Small shit was the worst. He would have done without Poke. Still, he shared a certain amount of the blame. There had been Gorgeous George in Vegas, and the 3 people in the White Continental. He had been in on that, and he supposed he had owned some of that heat. He supposed he deserved to take a fall. Do a little time. It wasn't something you volunteered for, but when they had you cold, they gave you the bullet, you ate it. Like he had told the lawyer. He thought he deserved about 20 for his part in the tri-state kill spree. Not in the electric chair. Christ, no. The thought of Lloyd Henrig riding the lightning was it was scary. It was crazy. But they had the key. That was the thing. They could lock you up and do what they wanted with you. In the last 3 days, Lloyd had vaguely begun to grasp the symbolic, talismanic power of the key. The key was your reward for playing by the rules. If you don't, they could lock you up. It was no different than the go-to-jail card in Monopoly. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. And the key went under certain prerogatives. Oh, and with the key went certain prerogatives. They could take away 10 years of your life, or 20, or 40. They could hire people like Mathers to beat on you. They could even take away your life in the electric chair. But having the key didn't give them the right to go away and leave you locked up to starve. It didn't give them the right to force you into eating a dead rat and to try to eat the dry ticking of your mattress. It didn't give them the right to leave you in a spot where you might just have eaten a man in the next cell to stay alive. If you can get that is. Doo-dah. There were certain things you just couldn't do to people. Having the key only took you so far and no further. They had left him here to die a horrible death when they could have let him out. He wasn't a mad dog killer. He was going to waste the first person he saw, in spite of what the papers had said. Small shit was the worst he had ever gotten into before meeting Poke. So he hated, and the hate commanded him to live, or at least to try. For a while it seemed to him that the hate and the determination to go on living, were useless things, because all of those who had the key had succumbed to the flu. They were beyond the reach of his vengeance. Then, little by little, as he grew hungrier, he realized that the flu wouldn't kill them. It would kill the losers like him. It would kill Mathers, but not the scumbag Screw who had hired Mathers because the Screw had the key. It wasn't going to kill the governor or the warden. The guard who said the warden was sick had obviously been a fucking liar. It wasn't going to kill the parole officers, the county sheriffs, the FBI agents. The flu would not touch those who had the key. It wouldn't dare. But Lloyd could touch them. But Lloyd would touch them. If they lived long enough to get out of here, he would touch them plenty. The cog leg snagged in Trask's cuff again. Come on, Lloyd whispered. Come on over here. Hamtown ladies sing this song all doo-dah day. Trask's body slid slowly, stiffly along the floor of his cell. No fisherman ever played a bonita more carefully or with greater wile than Lloyd played Trask. Once Trask's trousers ripped and Lloyd had to hook it on a new place. But at last his foot was close enough so that Lloyd could reach through the bars and grab it, if he wanted to. Nothing personal, he whispered to Trask. No, he touched Trask's leg. He caressed it. Nothing personal. I ain't gonna eat you, old buddy. Not unless I have to. He was not even aware that he was salivating. Lloyd heard someone in the ashy afterglow of the dusk. And at first, the sound was so far away and so strange, clash of metal on metal, that he thought he must be dreaming it. The waking and sleeping states had become very similar to him now. He crossed back and forth across the boundary, almost without knowing it. But then the voice came and he snapped upright on his cot, his eyes flaring wide, huge and lambent in his starved face. The voice came floating down the corridors from God knew how far, up in the administration wing, and then down the stairwell to the hallways which connected the visitors' areas to the central cell block where Lloyd was. It bobbed serenely through the twice-barred doors and finally reached Lloyd's ears. Ooh, anybody home? And strangely, Lloyd's first thought was, don't answer. Maybe he'll go away. Anybody home? Going once, going twice. Okay, I'm on my way. Just about to shake the dust of Phoenix from my boots. At that, Lloyd's paralysis broke. He catapulted off the cot, snatched up the cog leg, and began to beat it frantically on the bars. Vibrations raced up the metal and shivered in the bones of his clutched fist. No, he screamed, no, don't go, please don't go. The voice, closer now, coming from the stairway between the administration and this floor. We'll eat you up, we love you so, and oh, someone sounds so hungry. This was followed by a lazy chuckle. Lloyd dropped the cog leg on the floor and wrapped both hands around the bars of the cell door. Now he could hear the footfalls somewhere up in the shadows, walking steadily down the hall that led to the holding cell block. Lloyd wanted to burst into tears of relief. After all, he was saved, yet it was not joy but fear he felt in his heart, a growing dread that made him wish he had stayed silent. My God, what could be worse than starvation? Starvation made him think of Trask. Trask lay sprawled on his back in the ashy afterglow of dusk, one leg stretched stiffly into Lloyd's cell, and an essential subtraction had occurred in the region of the leg's calf. Fleshy part of the leg's calf. There were teeth marks there. Lloyd knew whose teeth had made those marks, but he had only the vaguest memory of lurching on fillet of Trask. All the same, powerful feelings of revulsion, guilt, and horror filled him. He rushed across to the bars and pushed Trask's leg back into his own cell. Then, Looking over his shoulder to make sure the owner of the voice was not yet in sight, he reached through, and with the dividing bars pressed against his face, he pulled Trask's pant leg down, hiding what he had done. Of course, there was no great hurry, because the bar gates at the head of the cell block were shut, and with the power off, the push button wouldn't work. His rescuer would have to go back and find the key. He would have to. Lloyd grunted as the electric motor, which operated the barred gate, whined into life. The silence of the cell block magnified the sound, which ceased with the familiar click-slam of the gates locking open. Then the steps were clocking steadily up the cell block walkway. Lloyd had gone to his cell door again after neatening up Trask. Now he involuntarily fell back 2 steps. He dropped his gaze to the floor outside, and what he saw first was a pair of dusty cowboy boots with pointed toes and run-down heels, and his first thought was that Poke had had a pair like that. The boots stopped in front of his cell. His gaze rose slowly, taking in the faded jeans snug down over the boots, the leather belt with the brass buckle, various astrological signs inside the pair of concentric circles, the jeans jacket with a button pinned to each of the breast pockets, a smile face on one, a dead pig and the words, "How's your pork?" on the other. The same instant, Lloyd's eyes reluctantly reached Randall Flagg's darkly flushed face. Flagg screamed, "Boo!" A single sound floated down the dead cell block, and then rushed back. Lloyd shrieked, stumbled over his own feet, fell down, and began to cry. "That's all right," Flagg soothed. "Hey, man, it's all right. Everything's purely all right." Lloyd sobbed, can you let me out? Please let me out. I don't want to be like my rabbit. I don't want to end up like that. It's not fair. If it wasn't for Poke, I never would have gotten into anything. Small shit. Please let me out, mister. I'll do anything." "You poor guy. You look like an advertisement for a summer vacation at a show." Despite the sympathy in Flagg's voice, Lloyd could not bring himself to raise his eyes beyond the knees of the newcomer's jeans. If he hooked into that face again, it would kill him. It was the face of a devil. "Please," Lloyd mumbled. "Please let me out. I'm starving." "How long you been shit-canned, my friend?" "I don't know," Lloyd said, wiping his eyes with his thin fingers. "A long time." "How come you're not dead already?" "I knew what was coming," Lloyd told the blue-jeaned legs as he drew the last tattered shards of his cunning around him. "I saved up my food, that's what." "Didn't happen to have a chomp of this fine fellow in the next cell by any chance?" "What?" Lloyd croaked. "What? No, Christ's sake! What do you think I am, mister? Mister, please." "His left leg there looks a little thinner than his right one." "That's the only reason I asked, my good friend." "I don't know nothing about that," Lloyd whispered. He was trembling all over. "How about Brer Rabbit? How'd he taste?" Lloyd put his hands over his face and said nothing. "What's your name?" Lloyd tried to say, but all that came out was a moan. "What's your name, soldier?" "Lloyd Henrid." He tried to think what to say next, and his mind was a chaotic jumble. He had been afraid when his lawyer told him he might go to the electric chair, but not this afraid. He had never been this afraid in his entire life. It was all Poke's idea. Screamed, "Poke should be here, not me." "Look at me, Lloyd." "No," Lloyd whispered. His eyes rolled wildly. "Why not?" "Because." "Go on." "Because I don't think you're real," Lloyd whispered. "And if you are real, mister, if you're real, you're the devil. Look at me, Lloyd." Helplessly, Lloyd turned his eyes up to the dark, turned his eyes to that dark, grinning face that hung behind an intersection of bars. The right hand held something up beside the right eye. Looking at it made Lloyd feel cold and hot all over. It looked like a black stone, so dark it seemed almost resinous and pitchy. There was a red flaw at the center of it. And to Lloyd, it looked like a terrible eye, bloody and half open, staring at him. Then Flagg turned it slightly between his fingers, and the red flaw in the black stone turned like a key. Flagg turned it back and forth between his fingers. Now it was the eye. Now it was the key. The eye, the key. He sang. She brought me coffee. She brought me tea. She brought me damn near everything but the workhouse key. Right, Lloyd? Sure, Lloyd said huskily. His eyes never left the small dark stone. Flagg began to walk it from one finger to the next, like a magician doing a trick. Now you're a man who must appreciate the value of a good key, the man said. The dark stone disappeared in his clutched fist and suddenly reappeared in his other hand, where it began to finger walk again. I'm sure you are, because what a key is for is opening doors. Is there anything more important in life than opening doors, Lloyd? Mister, I'm awfully hungry. Sure you are, the man said. An expression of concern spread over his face, an expression so magnified that it became grotesque. Jesus Christ, the rat isn't anything to eat. Why, do you know what I had for lunch? I had a nice rare roast beef sandwich on Vienna bread and a few onions and a lot of Golan's spicy bread of spicy brown. Sound good? Lloyd nodded his head, tears oozing slowly down his over bright eyes. Had some home fries and chocolate milk to go with it. And then for dessert, holy crow, I'm torturing you, aren't I? Someone out to take a hoss-whip to me. That's what they ought to do. I'm sorry. I'll let you right out, and then we'll go get something to eat, okay? Lloyd was too stunned to even nod. He had decided that the man with the key was indeed a devil, or even more likely a mirage, and the mirage would stand outside his cell until Lloyd finally dropped dead, talking happily about God and Jesus and Goldrin's spicy brown mustard as he made the strange black stone appear and disappear. But now the compassion on the man's face seemed real enough, and he sounded genuinely disgusted with himself. The black stone disappeared in his clutched fist again, and when the fist opened, Lloyd's wandering eyes beheld a flat silver key with the ornate grip laying on the stranger's palm. Oh my God, Lloyd croaked. You like that? The dark man asked, pleased. I learned that trick from a massage parlor, honey, in Secaucus, New Jersey, Lloyd. Secaucus, home of the world's greatest pig farms. He bent and seated the key in the lock of Lloyd's cell, and that was strange, because as well as his memory served him, right now was not very well. These cells had no keyways, because they were all opened and shut electronically. But he had no doubt that the silver key would work. Just as it rattled home, Flagg stopped and looked at Lloyd, grinning and slyly, and Lloyd felt despair wash over him again. It was all just a trick. Did I introduce myself? The name is Flagg, with a double G. Pleased to meet you. Likewise, Lloyd croaked. And I think, before I open this cell, and we go get some dinner, we ought to have a little understanding, Lloyd. Sure thing, Lloyd croaked, and began to cry again. I'm going to make you my right-hand man, Lloyd. Going to put you right up there with St. Peter. When I open this door, I'm going to slip the keys to the kingdom right into your hand. What a deal, right? Yeah, Lloyd whispered, growing frightened again. It was almost full dark now. Flagg was little more than a dark shape, but his eyes were still perfectly visible. They seemed to glow in the dark like the eyes of a lynx. One to the left of the bar that ended in a lockbox, one to the right. Lloyd felt terror, but something else as well, a kind of religious ecstasy, a pleasure of being chosen, the feeling that he had somehow won through to something. You'd like to get even with the people who left you here, isn't that right? Boy, that sure is, Lloyd said, forgetting his terror momentarily. It was swallowed up by a starving, sinewy anger. Not just those people, but everyone who would do a thing like that, Flagg suggested. It's the type of person, isn't it? A type. Certain type of a person. A man like you is nothing but garbage, because they are high up. They don't think a person like you has the right to live. That's just right, Lloyd said. His great hunger had suddenly been changed into a different kind of hunger. It had changed just as surely as the black stone had changed into the silver key. The man had expressed all the complex things he had felt in just a handful of sentences. It wasn't just the gate guard he wanted to get even with. Why, he's the wise-ass pussbag. What's the story, pussbag? Got anything smart? Excuse me, hiccups. Got anything smart to say? But because the gate guard wasn't the one. The gate guard had had the key, all right. The gate guard had not made the key. Someone had given it to him. The warden, Lloyd supposed. The warden hadn't made the key either. Lloyd wanted to find the makers and forgers. They would be immune to the flu, and he had business with them. Oh, yes, and it was good business. You know what the Bible says about the people like that? Flagg asked quietly. It says, the exalted shall be abased, and the mighty shall be brought low, and the stiff-necked shall be broken. And you know what it says about people like you, Lloyd? It says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And it says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall see God. Yes, even the devil knows the Bible. Even the devil believes in God. That doesn't mean anything when you believe. There's more to it. Lloyd was nodding and crying. For a moment he seemed like a blazing corona. It seemed like a blazing corona had formed around Flagg's head, a light so bright that if Lloyd looked at it for long, it would burn his eyes to cinders. Then it was gone. If it had ever been there at all. And it must not have been, because Lloyd had not even lost his night vision. Now, you aren't very bright, Flagg said, but you are the first. And I have a feeling you might be very loyal, you and I, Lloyd. We're going to go far. A good time for people like us. Everything is starting up for us. All I need is your word. Word? That's that we're going to stick together, you and me. No denials. No falling asleep on guard duty. There will be others very soon. They're on their way west already. For now, there's just us. I'll give you the key if you give me your promise. I promise, Lloyd said. And the words seemed to hang in the air, vibrating strangely. He listened to that vibration, his head cocked to one side, and he could almost see those two words, glowing as darkly as the aurora borealis reflected in a dead man's eye. Then he forgot about them as the tumblers made their half turns inside the lockbox. The next moment the lockbox fell at Flagg's feet, tendrils of smoke seeping from it. You're free, Lloyd. Come on out. Unbelieving, Lloyd touched the bars hesitantly, as if they might burn him, and indeed, they did seem warm. But when he pushed, the doors slid back easily and soundlessly. He stared at his savior with burning eyes. Something was placed in his mind, the key. It's yours now, Lloyd. Mine? Flagg grabbed Lloyd's fingers and closed them around it. And Lloyd felt it move in his hand, felt it change. He uttered a hoarse cry, and his fingers sprang open. The key was gone, and in its place was a black stone with the red flaw. He held it up, wondering something, and turned it in this way and that. Now the red flaw looked like a key, now like a skull, now like a bloody, half-closed eye again. Mine, Lloyd answered himself. This time he closed his hands with no help, holding the stone savagely tight. Shall we get some dinner? Flagg asked. We've got a lot of driving to do tonight. Dinner? Lloyd said. All right. There's such a lot to do, Flagg said happily. And we're going to move very fast. They walked towards the stairs together, past the dead men in their cells. When Lloyd stumbled in weakness, Flagg seized his arm above the elbow and bore him up. Lloyd turned and looked into the grinning face with something more than gratitude. He looked at Flagg, something like love. How much more have we got to this next one? So I want to try. I've noticed that these chapters are getting bigger, and that's why we're not able to get through like 5 chapters like we did at the beginning, because like 76, like there's a lot that's going to be happening in these next 36 chapters. Where we've gotten now, we've gotten through 39 chapters. Okay, we're going on to chapter 40, and we've gotten through 39. And in that 39 chapters, we're only getting to where people are meeting other people. So we've gotten through the death, we've gotten through the journey starting, but there's so much that is going to happen so fast now. And I'm not going to give anything away, but I am going to tell you that there's a lot that's going to happen. So we may only get through 1 or 2 chapters per reading, because I don't want to stick to like more than 2 hours, because then I start getting caught up. I could sit here and read all day, but then I'd get nothing done. So, and I have a lot to do today for tomorrow, and then maybe after tomorrow afternoon I'll be able to read a lot more, but right now there's a lot I got to do and reel. So I think we're going to stop there for today. We did 37 to 39, which is more than I thought we were going to do. Like, we started with the end of 36 and we went to 39. So that's 2 chapters. Like, we did really well. So I think we're going to stop there for now. And it looks like when we start up tonight, we are going to be with Nick. Now, I'm not sure if I am going to be late reading. It really depends, because I've got so much to do and I am just overwhelmed, and I've got to make up a list of what to do. So, our house is being sold, and we have been offered to buy it, but the landlord's going to come take some pictures. And so we're just trying to clean up, make sure that when she puts them online, that it looks decent, and it's not like I have a box of brakes and rotors on my table. Like, nobody wants to see that in pictures, right? So we're going to see what we can work with today and get some things done, and just kind of, there's only so much they can do, but we're really hoping that we're going to get it. I mean, I've got my GoFundMes, and I've really thought about changing the one, but I did take away the price for the brakes and rotors for the car one, but oh my Lord. I know they're not going to go anywhere, but I'm still asking for help on them. But right now, we're just praying we don't lose our home. If it gets sold, it's a possibility we're going to have to move, and we have no idea where we would go. So, we have no idea if we're going to be told we have to move. Not really evicted, but like if somebody buys the house, they're going to want it. They're going to want to live in here. And then we have to pack everything up and move. In that time, we have to also fix our cars. So, pray for me, huh? Got a lot to do. And only a few months to do it. So hopefully we'll be here at Christmas. All we can do is pray. Yeah. All right. I'm going to let you guys go. Pray for me. Pray for our family. And I shall pray for yours. In the meantime, y'all have a good day. And I will see you this evening. I love y'all. Follow me if you haven't. Thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for listening to my rants and stuff. I really appreciate it. I shall see you all soon. And if anything changes, I will try and Oh, it's not that. Huh? You're talking about the house? Hold on, I'll write you on Discord. I'll explain. I told you, the landlord's selling the house. Yeah. So, hon, I will talk to you on Discord. So give me a few minutes. And yeah, I mean, we're good. We just, somebody buys the house before we do, then we will have to move. So we're praying that we can buy it first. We're almost done getting all the paperwork. We're going up to get the rest today in the attic. Cross our fingers. All right. I will talk to y'all soon. Love y'all. Y'all have a good day. Thanks. Bye.